Welcome back to Lost in Citations. Today's guest is Dr. Ali H. Al-Hoorie, an applied linguist from Saudi Arabia and one of our favorite people in the world. Dr. Ali Al-Hoorie, thank you so much for coming back on Lost in Citations.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's always great to follow you on social media, and it's a great opportunity to catch up with you now. It's really an open door policy. We always get a lot of great feedback when you come on the show. I know you're a very busy man. You like to write 4 hours a day and so forth. I think you mentioned that on a previous show. So thank you for taking the time to come back on Lost in Citations.
Sure, I'm happy to do this again.
Okay, so lots to talk about on the show today. Later on, we're going to be speaking about today's paper, The Fundamental Difference Hypothesis, expanding the conversation in language learning motivation. But before we get into the paper, let's catch up with you, Dr. Ali Al-Hoorie. So first of all, I noticed something on Facebook. I think it was today. Of course, when people listen to this, there'll be a bit of a time lag. But I'm a member of IAPL, the International Association for the Psychology of Language Learning, and a lot of previous guests have been on this very same podcast. And I noticed an advertisement for a motivation SIG, special interest group, that you were starting with IAPL. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, this idea, the board of IAPL asked me to organize a SIG for motivation. The name hasn't been decided yet, but it will be about motivation. And the idea is that we will organize activities regularly to connect interested people all over the world virtually. And, maybe come and meet and chat every now and then about different things.
That's great. It seems like IAPL keeps growing and growing. I mean, the fact that you're starting a SIG, does that mean that other SIGs are going to start popping up as well?
Yes, I don't know what SIGs are being proposed currently, but my understanding is that there are some SIGs in preparation currently, and one can join up to 3 SIGs for free. And then, according to IAPL bylaws, you need to pay $5 for each additional SIG, which the membership will be for 2 years, so that's nothing.
Yeah, so if people would like information, please go to iapple.com, and all the information is there. We were briefly discussing before we started recording about the upcoming conference, the PLL conference in June in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Peter McIntyre's hometown. I have purchased a ticket. Hopefully I'm going to be able to go. The big problem for me is returning to Japan. It's okay to leave, but it's hard to come back. So fingers crossed they loosen the 14-day quarantine on return. So hopefully I'll be able to go. What about you?
Yeah, hopefully, COVID permitting, if things are okay, then, hopefully we'll see each other there then.
That would be awesome. Were you at the very first PLL conference? Was it in Austria?
No, I think it was 2013, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was around that time. It was my first PhD year. And, I wasn't going to conferences on my first PhD year. I had many other things to worry about.
What was I forget you told the story in a previous show.
Maybe 14, I was just starting that year.
What was the conference that you weren't going to go to, and then Zoltan Dornier, basically told you have to go to it? You were thinking about, you had mentioned on a previous podcast, you said, I'm kind of busy, I'm not going to go, and then Dornier said, what? You're not going to go to this conference? And then you kind of went.
Yeah, it was the motivation conference that he was himself organizing at Nottingham.
Okay.
So I was at the university with him and saying, I'm not going to this conference. Yeah, and then he said, you cannot do this.
Well, that's cool. Okay, so people should check out the Motivation SIG at IAPL. Another thing that I've noticed for people that are following you on social media, you recently did a presentation in China. I believe it was called From Replication to Substantiation in Applied Linguistics. Would you like to maybe catch the listeners up on the broad strokes of that?
Yeah, it was at Huazhong University of Science and Technology. It's about a recent paper of ours with Phil Hiver, Diane Larson Freeman, and Wonder Lowy. It's from replication to substantiation. And basically, the idea is replication is the word used maybe too much. Sometimes your study is not a replication in any broad sense, but still called conceptual replication or approximate replication. All these, you know, the word replications comes up a lot. So we thought that it's not really a replication. You call it replication, but it's not. It's a problem with terminology. So we proposed a different taxonomy, let's say, of research, and one type of it is replication. It has to be, to follow certain conditions to be considered a replication. Otherwise, there are other names that you can use to describe your research.
I see. And there's a video of that presentation, right, on your Facebook?
Yeah. You can watch the lecture there.
So people should definitely check that out. You mentioned a paper. You said it was, who were the authors again?
Myself, Phil Hiver, Diane Larson Freeman, and Wonder Lowy from the Netherlands.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give just quickly. Okay, so for people that are just listening to the show now, maybe you should go back and listen to a few episodes. The first one is citation number 49, where Ali came on the show to talk about the paper that you wrote with Phil Hiver, re-examining the role of vision. And then Phil Hiver came on the podcast, citation 53, and he gave the story about meeting Diane Lawson Freeman at Nottingham, which was kind of a cool story. And then Ali came back on in citation 55, where he talked about the paper that you edited with Peter McIntyre. And then also citation 67 was Joe Vida, one of your co-authors, about a paper with the flipped classroom. So if you go to our website and you type in Al-Hoorie, that search engine should be able to lead you back to some of these episodes. And again, when I heard that name, Diane Lawson Freeman, I just immediately thought of Phil Hiver sitting in a bus on the way to, what was the forest? What's the famous forest in near Nottingham? What's the name of that forest? I forget. It's it was like in a movie. Oh my gosh, my brain is totally. If Phil's listening, he knows. Anyway, it's a cool story, so people should go back and listen to that. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Have you seen that movie? What's the forest? Do you know? Can you help me out, Ali? Do you know the name of the forest?
Sherwood Forest.
Sherwood. Thank you. Sherwood Forest. Thank you. The last thing that, if you're following Ali on social media, the Essex Alumni Award. Now, this sounds very interesting. Sounds very prestigious. Can you tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an award that's given by the British Council for people who have graduated from British universities. Mm-hmm. And they evaluate people, look at their contributions, what they did, their research output, and beyond the research output, I have been reviewing things, serving at editorial boards, doing sorts of things. So they nominated me for this award. I have also been doing research related to machine learning and artificial intelligence, mm-hmm. related to plagiarism, related to evaluation of different journals. Yeah, so it has been fun. And what I've been thinking about is that all this research that we are doing is, in a way, trying to understand the human mind. If you study emotions, it's about the mind, how the mind thinks. If you study behavior, motivation, learning, aptitude, teaching, it's all about how in the end it goes back to how the mind works. And as you know, the human mind is one of the most complex objects in the universe, right?
I
And
wish mine
fun
worked
fact.
better. Then I'd be able to name the Sherwood Forest. I'm going to be thinking about why my mind doesn't work right for a couple hours after this interview. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Fun fact: the second most complex system in the body is the immune system. And if you just scratch your finger on something and you start bleeding, all these stuff start happening, fighting bacteria and viruses and things. It just the second most complex system. So what we are doing when we study the human brain currently, some people think that it's kind of primitive. We give people a questionnaire or talk with somebody and then try to infer about them. Some people will use some fancy technology like fMRI and scan their brains to learn. But some people thought, why don't we use artificial intelligence? And what machine learning basically, if you go back in history, computers fundamentally are based on the logic of if then. If the user clicks this, you give them that output. If you do this, you give them that output. If this happens, then there is a loop, and then there is this and that. Basically, this is the fundamental idea of the classical computer, let's say. But how the human brain works is not like if then. So if you have a child and you want to teach them about, this is a cat, for example, you don't give them if then statements like, if the ear is like this, it's a cat. If the mouth is like that, it's a dog. What you actually do is you show them a picture of a cat, for example, and say, cat. And that's it. And then the mind does its thing, right? Then you show them another picture of a dog and say, dog. And then the mind does its thing. So machine learning is based on this logic. You feed into the algorithms pictures of dogs and say these are dogs, and pictures of cats and say these are cats, and then let the machine does this thing to learn the differences. Okay, then you need thousands and millions of pictures. Just this is how big data. But then it will develop a model that can usually pretty accurately tell that this new picture is a cat or a dog, which is impressive. So going back, so some people started saying, why don't we use this technology to understand the human brain? So what they did was that they scanned people and they showed the participant, say the letter N, for example. And the participant is just looks at this letter, and when you look at something, there is some brain activation. So they scan this participant's activation, and then they ask the participant to look at, say, O, just a basic example, and then they scan this their brains. Then they repeat this, get a lot of data, and then they use this algorithm that has learned the difference between the activation of the letter O and the letter N, and then show them new scans and say, can you guess whether the participant is looking at N or O? And they can do that. Okay. And then they can show them, they go one step further. They show the participants pictures of objects like a pen, and then they scan, see the activation, and a door, for example, or a key. And then the machine learning can tell that this participant is looking now at a door or a pen or something else. It's kind of interesting. And then they went one step further and they were able to reconstruct or draw what face the participant is looking at, which is very impressive. It can actually read your mind. This is existing technology. It's not like, sci-fi. It will redraw the picture that you are looking at. It may be a bit blurry or something, but it will do it. So it's actually reading your mind in a sense. It's or reading what you are looking at, let's say, to be more accurate. And so, yes, I mean, with this, if today we have this sort of technology, you can only imagine what will happen in 50 or 100 years. So going back to my point, if you are not jumping on this bandwagon of artificial intelligence, there is a risk that at some point your research methodology will be so primitive. It will be like, I don't know, lobotomy or something. In the future, we'll look at it and we'll look at these people in their 20s, use questionnaire, laugh at you, or something like this. So yeah, you never know. I mean,
well, I was reading.
I don't know.
I was reading about this Essex Award. It said that you're working on something that can predict early stages of Alzheimer's.
Yes, there is some research. So what I did was I designed a device that applies this model into predicting whether the user could possibly be suffering from Alzheimer's or not.
Wow. Man, you're on the way to getting like a Nobel Prize if you keep going like this. Is that the goal?
Yeah, so that's it. This is the story of.
So when you get a Nobel Prize, will you still come back on Lost in Citations, or you'll be too good for us at that point?
Let's wait and see.
Does that mean I have to go through like your publicist at that point? Hey, I got to ask you a question. So in a previous episode, you talked about, I think we were talking about self-efficacy, and you said you have this app that kind of rewards you on a smiley face if you do. I think what your goal was 4 hours of research a day, right? Is that still the goal?
It's 3 hours a day. When I was doing my PhD, when I had more time, it was 4 hours. Now I aim for minimum of 3 hours a day, every day of the week.
How do you? I'm guessing you don't drink alcohol, right?
No.
So how do you turn your brain off at the end of the day? Because I got to imagine your brain is just thinking, you're working on so many projects at once. Like that's one thing. I don't drink alcohol so much. I'm trying to take a little bit of a break, but that's one thing that I use alcohol for, is to say, okay, your day's finished now. It's time to stop thinking. Like it's okay for you to just say, okay, well, I've done my 3 hours of work, but do you find that your brain keeps on wandering, and that's like, it makes it difficult for you to go to sleep? How do you, stop your brain from thinking, or do you let it go?
Well, two things. First, I usually finish by around 6 p.m. and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So that's like, I don't go into the night working. That would be very unusual for me to do that. Maybe there is something urgent or something, or I have a meeting with like Phil and some other people and we have different time zones. So I have to have a meeting at night, my time zone. And second, I don't actually multitask. Yeah, I was looking for this word. I don't multitask, believe it or not. I work on one project at a time. I find it hard to switch from task to task.
You're talking about weekly?
No, I take one project,
per
focus fully on it, and move to the next project only when I finish what I have to finish in that project.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay.
So intensive attention on one thing only. Then I move
see.
to the next thing.
I see. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I do. I try to make a schedule, and I do it. I stick to the same thing per day, but sometimes I'll jump from one to the other on different days. That's so. What do you do in the evening to wind down?
I watch television, sit with my daughters, have dinner, and
So you're
different
able
things.
to make that, because I think that's one thing that's been a challenge for a lot of people during this COVID era is, the boundary. A lot of people, we miss going to the office, right? You have the commute where you can drive and you get into work mode and you drive, you come back, I'm getting into home mode. But I definitely find it challenging to just switch off and say, okay, I'm not going to be thinking about what I need to do tomorrow or thinking about what I did today, for example.
Yeah, I go to work pretty much every business day of the week, so that makes it a bit easier for me.
Okay. All right, so it's 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. I got a lot to catching up to do. Okay, so those are the three things people should check out. The motivation SIG for iApple, from replication to substantiation in applied linguistics, the presentation, and look up Ali's the Essex Alumni Award. Very, very cool stuff. And your website. What's your website? I guess they could just Google your name, right?
Yeah, just my name, alialhoorie.com.
Nice website. Did you design that?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So you can build websites too.
There are some easy services that that are user friendly. You don't have to write code or anything, just drag and drop. So it's not that difficult.
Okay, so let's jump into the paper, today's paper, The Fundamental Difference Hypothesis, Expanding the Conversation in Language Learning Motivation. You publish so many different papers. I guess I want to start with this. Why, out of the papers that you've been doing, why did you decide this one might be the best one for the podcast today?
I think, because... let me tell you why we decided to do this study in the first place, and this will answer your question.
Sure.
So before I did my PhD, when after I finished my MA and when I started my PhD, there was a 7-year gap. So during this time, I was reading the literature here and there. It was very helpful, actually. I found, in retrospect, I think this time lag was useful for me, because when I started my PhD, I wasn't like a fresh MA graduate. I had a lot of, in my bag during these years. So that was very helpful. So I was reading the literature here and there, and one day I came across a paper by somebody called Blave Roman, published in 1990, and it was an old scanned paper that I found somewhere online. And so I said, and the title of that paper was The Fundamental Difference Hypothesis. So I said, what's this strange name? Let me read this paper. So I read that paper, and it was about the hypothesis that there is a fundamental difference between learning your first language in childhood and learning your second language in adulthood. And that explains why usually it's hard to be as successful in second languages in adulthood as in first languages in childhood. So the argument was that there is some language specific mechanism in the brain that children use, but adults use more general problem-solving skills to learn the language. So there is a fundamental difference between these two. So it was a paper that I read. It was a fun paper, but nothing to do with my own research, my interest into motivation. So
At that time, did you agree
yeah,
with that hypothesis?
it was an interesting hypothesis. I didn't really have an opinion because it wasn't my research area anyway. So it was. I soon forgot about it.
Okay.
And turned my attention to reading motivation literature. So I started reading Gardner, Dornier, Oshioda, and some other people in the field. And there was one recurring theme that I kept coming across. And that theme was learning a language is different from learning other school subjects. Okay, so there you come across it, everywhere in introductions and other things. So I'm looking at a quote from Dornier. He's saying in one of his papers that this idea has been accepted by researchers all over the world, regardless of the actual learning situation they were working in. So it's just unanimously accepted. And the origin of this idea was Robert Gardner in the mid-50s. He was still a PhD student at the time. He went to his supervisor, Lambert, and they were thinking about a research topic for Gardner. And Gardner said, I wonder if it makes it easier to learn a second language if you like these people versus if you don't like the people who are speaking that language. And Lambert said, there it is, this is your research topic. And he did his research on that area. So this idea came into existence, that learning a second language, learning a language is not the same as learning, say, mathematics or learning some other, school subject. So that I came across this idea. It was also an interesting idea. It's fun. Then I kept reading the literature, and then I came across what came to be known as the Modern Language Journal debate. And this was a debate in the journal, the Modern Language Journal, in the early 90s. Gardner and Dornier and Rebecca Oxford and some other people were going back and forth about where motivation research should go. And one of the points in that debate and in the general atmosphere was that we need to catch up, air quotes, with advances in educational psychology. And in education and in other places, which also sounds an interesting idea. Why should we be isolated from other fields that are doing pretty much the same thing as we are doing? But then when you put the two things together, that language learning or language motivation is different from other school subjects, and then you say, we should look at what researchers of mathematics are doing, and then see their theories. There is some sort of contradiction here. Because logically, if you think that we are different, we are unique, it's a special case, language learning is a special case, then you need to develop native theories that can accommodate the uniqueness of language learning. It wouldn't make much sense to go into other fields and take their theories. It's kind of odd. There is something that doesn't add up. Do you need to adapt these theories in the first place and then somehow fit them into language learning? Or why don't you develop your own theories based on your understanding of language learning? Why do you need to take this route? So I started reading, digging up the literature. I started looking for research. Of course, the most direct way to to test the hypothesis empirically that language learning is different from other at the motivational level than other school subjects is to do a comparative research. And there wasn't much comparative research. There was just all these, it's taken for granted. So I started reading the literature, and then I was surprised to see a study by Gardner himself applying his model, the integrative model, into statistics. So the integrative model, just to go one step back to explain this, Gardner's theory is that if you like the people of the target language, if you like their culture, if you want to, I don't know, communicate with them and other things, then this type of attitude will increase your motivation, and then this will increase the chance of success in learning that language. So that's a very simplified version of his model, which makes sense. It's okay. There's no problem in it. But then the surprise, as I said, was that he applied his own model into learning statistics. And then he showed that the model fit in that field also.
So what do you mean? What do you mean fit? The people wanted to be a part of the statistics community?
Yes. So he basically adapted his questionnaire that he uses to test his theory in language learning and administered it to students of statistics. Do you like to be with people who are expert in statistics and this and that? And then so the correlation between their responses and responses to motivation to learn statistics, and then achievement in statistics. And so the positive correlations that he expected based on his model. That's to simplify the idea. So, and it fit, and he justified it also, saying that, well, there are some similarities between language and statistics. You learn new vocabulary in statistics. There are affective reactions to statistics like anxiety, etc., etc. So, and for me, I said, where did the idea that language learning is different go? It's kind of some contradiction here. And then this paper was like, I don't know, the 80s or the 90s, I don't know. It was an old paper. But then there was another newer paper by one of his students, Peter McIntyre, testing the same model on learning music.
Yeah, so the Gardner paper was 1993.
Okay.
Lalonde and Gardner, is that the? And
yes,
then
yes.
The McIntyre is 2012.
Yes. And then you can see the difference between these two papers. One applying the model in statistics, very hard and dry subject, a STEM subject. And then McIntyre is applying it in the in music, which is on the other side of the continuum. And both of them said, yes, the model works fine. And then there is some research by some other emerging researchers like Quint, Olga Baldwin, and Luke Fryer doing comparative research and also showing that the motivation is pretty much similar across different school subjects. So that gave me the idea of doing this study. That's, long story,
Quick,
the idea.
Quick side note, Luke Fryer, he used to run the program at the school that I'm teaching at now. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the stuff that he did. I guess another quick note to the listeners, a lot of the citations in this paper, a lot of these guests have been on this podcast. So Kim Knowles, citation 83, Stephen Ryan, citation 81. Again, Peter McIntyre, citation 51. Also, Dr. Evans, I don't know if you listened to that episode, Ali, citation 85. He's an educational psychologist at the University of New South Wales, and we talked about his longitudinal study about identity and music. So it's interesting because he was studying the same sort of things and applying it to music, and he was actually citing a lot of Kim Knowles with self-determination theory, which you also mentioned in this paper. So there's a lot of intersecting themes that go on. Well, I guess you study motivation, you know that better than anyone. Intersecting themes must keep you up at night. Okay, so that's the background, that's the overview. So talk about planning this study and putting it together and conducting the study.
Yeah, so this idea came when I was still a PhD student at Nottingham, and I saw Phil, and Phil was doing his PhD part-time, so he came to the to campus occasionally. So we sat and we planned a bunch of studies together, including the replication paper that we talked about in a previous episode. And in all these studies, we didn't tell our supervisor about them. It was our own thing. We didn't want to, because we knew that he wasn't going to co-author the papers with us. We know his style, and we wanted to do
what's
our
his
own
what's
thing.
his style? What's the style?
He usually is very picky in co-authoring, because he doesn't have to. If the paper is not impressive, then it will be very hard for him to agree to invest into that paper, especially considering his old age and he's about to retire and he has other things to do. So he's not really into let's do this study and then do that study.
So so I'm just kind of getting your mindset. So knowing that he wouldn't be a co-author would discourage you from talking about an idea? Is that the only reason? Or is it just because you thought maybe he'd be against it at the time?
Yeah, because we like to do our own thing independently. Mm-hmm. Phil and I, and we didn't want to involve other people, especially since one of the papers was the replication of one of his studies.
Right.
So we didn't want to. Yeah. So
now that again, that episode, citation 53, where I talked to Phil Hiver, we actually talked about that. Where there are fears of replicating this study that was done by your supervisor. But in that conversation, he said, he was kind of inspired by Zoltan, tangentially, I guess, to do these kind of things, even though he didn't really tell him at the time. He thought that it was like he was motivated by Dornier, his personality. So it's interesting. It's kind of a dichotomy what you're talking about. And on one hand, both of you are saying, okay, we don't really need to run this by him. But on the other hand, I guess his presence would motivate you to be independent, if that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, I would love to collaborate with him again if he agrees, but his age and everything, and he's not as active as like 20 years ago or something. So it's kind of hard to convince him to collaborate. Otherwise, it would be great if I collaborate with him again, because I did collaborate with him once, and Phil did so also, and both of these papers are highly cited. One of the top cited papers in both my profile and his profile.
Did you think that if you brought some of these ideas up to him, he would discourage you from doing them?
Well, I mean, he might have an opinion. I don't know whether he would agree or disagree, but because we liked this idea, we didn't feel we needed approval from somebody. You like something, sense, yeah. You go and do it. Just you don't want to open doors to other stuff.
Well, and that's what it should be, right? You shouldn't have an advisor who would like stop you from doing something. So, okay, so you're thinking about doing that. You're talking with Phil, and you said he's studying part-time, so I guess he's living in Korea still.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't have to go through our supervisor, because we could clear the ethics from his Korean institution.
Mm-hmm.
So Nottingham doesn't have to be involved.
Right. That makes sense. And you had a really large sample size, like over 600, right?
Yeah, the idea, as we were planning to collect the data, we were at AAAL. I'm not sure which year it was. And we saw some people there, including Peter McIntyre. So we talked with him about this idea. And our original plan was to use Gardner's model.
Mm-hmm.
But Peter and some of the other people said, why don't you use Zoltan's model? Because it hasn't been applied using that model. There has been research using Gardner's model. Why don't you do the other model also? We said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do it.
So that's the L2 motivational self-system framework. So
yes.
Can you give us the broad strokes of that model?
Yes. So that model presents three main variables that can predict language learning. The ideal L2 self, which means, what you want to do. The O2 L2 self, which is what others want you to do.
Oh.
And your L2, the learning context and your attitudes about the learning situation. So these are the three variables. My personal opinion is that this model is not very strong.
Okay.
It doesn't answer many questions. It has many problems. If my supervisor is hearing now, sorry, I just, I have to say it.
It's great.
One of the main problems, as coincidentally, Peter McIntyre himself has just written a chapter on this very issue about why, as I said, the ideal self, the O2 self, and as you know, the self itself is very complex, very, very complex. And so people were unhappy with integrative motivation, integrativeness. So the solution is to use the self, which is even more complex.
Right. Past self, future self. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have all these selves, the crying self and the banana eating self and all these selves from the literature, like madness.
The banana eating self. That's when I'm most at peace.
Yeah. And so Peter wrote this chapter about the fact that using the self to explain motivation is not really a good way to go forward. And, to put it differently, it's actually one step backwards in motivation research, actually. And so Peter wrote this chapter, and incidentally, that chapter is appearing in a book dedicated to Zoltan Dornier, edited by myself.
Dedicated.
Yeah. So it's appearing, this year, actually next month. It's appearing next month at Bloomsbury.
What's the name of the book?
The title of the book is Researching Language Learning Motivation, a concise guide, and it is edited by myself and Dr. Frozina Sabu.
How do you have time to do all of this stuff? I mean, I just don't get it.
It's
3
fun,
hours a day doesn't seem like it's enough.
It's fun. If you love what you do, then you don't have to work a day.
I guess that means I don't love what I do because it always seems like work. I mean, I like doing the podcast. I like talking to people about it. But when I actually have to do it, ooh, it's rough. It is rough. I mean, I get enjoyment out of it, but I do not love it like you. I have to admit. I love seeing other people succeed at it and do like high level work, and I'm in awe and admire. That's one of the reasons I like doing this podcast, is to like talk to people like yourself. But yeah, I mean, I've heard other people say the same thing. Like, it doesn't feel like work. I really love doing it. I'd be reading about this stuff anyway. Yeah, I'm in awe of all of these projects because it's not just quantity. I mean, you're putting out like a lot of I think I talked about this last time, but you're kind of in this good stride right now where you're just pumping out a lot of quality work. Where some people would say, "Oh, I don't have so many citations, but if you really look, I've got some really good ideas." I mean, you're kind of doing both. Good ideas, well-written papers, well-written chapters, editing books. It's crazy.
I mean, let me say something off the side here. Now, at the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned the Nobel Prize as a joke. Now, let's imagine
I
for a
wasn't joking.
second.
I wasn't joking. I'm serious.
Now, the idea, there is no Nobel Prize for linguistics or applied linguistics. The closest field for a Nobel Prize is economics. Okay, so it doesn't apply to our field.
But what about
the
Alzheimer's invention?
That's something, I don't know. That's something different. Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah. So let's imagine for a second that we have a prestigious award like Nobel or some other award for applied linguists.
And there's no such award now?
I mean, well, I'm not sure. There is a Distinguished Scholar Award at AAAL. There are some Best Book Awards. I'm not sure if there is some kind of competition, Nobel-like competition, to see who is the one with the best discovery or something in applied linguistics. I'm not sure about this. So let's say that there is something like this. There is a prestigious award. Now ask yourself, is the paper that you are currently working on a candidate for that award?
No.
Then why are you doing it? Why don't you go for something else?
I'm not smart enough.
I mean.
Sorry, I shouldn't be asking. I shouldn't be answering. I apologize. You're asking the greater audience. I shouldn't have interjected myself. Sorry. Ask the question again. I'll stay silent, and we'll let the listeners answer in their own mind.
Yeah. So, is the project or the research project that you are working on a possible candidate for that award? If not, why don't you look for something important? I know it's subjective. I know that different people have different opinions. But if you yourself know deep down that the project that you are spending 1 or 2 years on is not that important, why are you working on it? Right? That's a reasonable question. Now, I know also, not is it only subjective, but also research is cumulative. It's not like one big discovery at a time. It might happen, but it's less often than incremental accumulation of knowledge. But do you have this plan to build a line of research that could eventually lead you to be a candidate for an award like that? If not, why aren't you planning? These are reasonable questions. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was kind of answering tongue in cheek, but there's also the idea that some people, like for me, I have a really good idea, but I got sidetracked with COVID. And I ran up against a lot of walls with my advisors and saying, this heart rate thing and and this hypothesis I want to test. I almost feel like I have to, the thing I really want to do, it's funny. It's actually related to what you were saying. The thing that I really want to do is probably going to be done independent from my PhD at some point when I'm really kind of out on my own and I don't need to get, approval from my supervisor, because a lot of times people get into programs and, they're guided by their supervisor and, they're working towards the PhD, which is going to help them get the job as a professor and so on and so forth. And I don't know if it's like other people, but personally, there's a research project I want to do, but it's just not going to fit in my PhD program right now. It was just going to be too complicated. But when I'm out free and on my own, I think I'm going to pursue it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Funnily enough, Dr. Ibrahim Zana, right?
No, I don't.
Dr. Zana Ibrahim, he is he is a graduate of Nottingham with us. He's working on DMCs along with Zoltan, Christine Muir, and some other people. So he was with us at Nottingham, and we used to joke when we were PhD students that PhD is slavery. You have to follow the instructions of your supervisor. Mm-hmm. Once you graduate, then you become free, just as you said, and then you can pursue what you feel are important.
Yeah, you gotta trial by fire. If you can get through it, then you're at freedom, right?
Yeah, and actually, Phil and I, we collaborate a lot, and we actually have one day a year where we discuss our strategic plan.
I like it.
Fancy name. And actually we have slides like, 30 or 40, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 slides with plans and what projects will work and this and that and different things. And we have this meeting once a year to discuss plans for the next year.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I am motivated. There's this research track. I got down a good track and exciting and then just, barrier after barrier. And I think other people might empathize with that. You might have a good idea, but you're getting beaten down by the barriers for whatever they are. But I hope I'm going to come back. I do think that my idea, it wouldn't be up for a Nobel Prize or anything, but I would be proud of it. I definitely could say that if I was working on it 3 hours a day, it would go by fast. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, what is important and what's worth working on is subjective at the end of the day. We have to acknowledge this. But if you yourself believe that what you are working on is not important, then there are a lot of questions that you should ask yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have to be asking myself a lot of questions once this episode's over. All right. So did we make it through the paper? No, we didn't. Okay.
Yeah. So after we agreed on the plan, we pre-registered our analyses.
Love that.
And pre-registration means you go to a specific website like the OSF, the Open Science Framework, or a website called As Predicted, and you log in, make a free account, and create a project. And there is a form that you fill in about how you are planning to analyze your data after you collect it. You have not collected your data yet. Okay. And there are some questions for you it's a form you fill in. I will use a p-value of 0.5, 0.05. I will, use this variable as a dependent variable. I will use that variable as an independent variable. I will use ANOVA. I will use t-test. I will use whatever. I will handle outliers in a specific way. I will check the reliability using this, and some basic questions about how you will analyze your data. But then you click submit, and then the project becomes frozen. and you yourself cannot edit it anymore.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in the previous episode, and I think you got a badge for it, and
Yes, some journals give badges, and there are badges for pre-registration. There are badges for open data and open instruments. Yeah, so we pre-registered. The idea of pre-registration is that so that you follow your plan and you don't change it when you don't get the results that you wanted.
yeah, I
So
almost feel like this should be required.
I know, right? In some other fields, it's becoming a requirement. So, for example, somebody might do a study, and the author might be hoping that there will be, this group will be, significantly different from the other groups. So, but they don't have a significant difference. So they say, okay, let me subdivide the groups into extremes here and there, redo the analysis, and if it's not significant, okay, let me divide them into 3 groups and then do the analysis. Let me remove that outlier, I'm not sure about that, and then you do the analysis different ways. Then bingo, you have something significant and you publish your paper. Now, in modern research methodology, this is considered a questionable research practice, and actually at some university in the Netherlands, there was one case where it was considered actually a research misconduct. So it's not just questionable; it's officially a misconduct if you do that.
Well, yeah, and the other side quickly is that for people that do those sorts of things, it makes you skeptical about everybody's paper, right?
Yeah, I know.
So those people that actually did,
if it wasn't pre-registered,
right? Yeah, exactly. So if you have, people that are out there doing it and it, I'm actually almost skeptical about a lot of papers I read, except for yours, of course, that are, you have that badge. But aren't you sometimes when you go to a conference and you hear someone give a presentation, it just sounds a little bit too perfect? Like nothing went wrong? Yeah, really? Everything went exactly as planned? Really? Nothing? Yeah. Your hypothesis was perfect? I just immediately think I just don't believe it. How can that be?
Yeah.
And that person could be doing it correctly, right? So it's like, yeah, the people that are not doing it the right way kind of muddy the waters.
Yeah, and the problem is that, the people who do these questionable practices will probably be the ones that eventually publish their papers in prestigious journals.
Right.
Right? Because they have the perfect results. So some researchers, likened this to using steroids. So use steroids illegal, and then you win over everybody else.
Well, yeah, and I don't understand why journals don't need to publish papers that have findings that didn't work out. Isn't that useful as well? Why do we just need to publish things that worked out? Like, I feel like I could learn a lot about, things that fell flat or didn't work.
The currency of academia is citations. And journals are mindful of what papers will receive the most citations and which papers will get the most citations and which not. And if you present perfect, sexy results, then everybody will want to read that paper and cite it. If you present a paper saying that, I did this and, there was nothing, then... which is, of course, wrong. This will introduce publication bias, which is a very big problem. So, incidentally, I talked briefly about this particular point in my presentation in China. So, it's if you replicate a paper, for example. So, there is a paper, let's say, and you look at the results look perfect, and you are skeptical about them. So, you do a replication. If you do get the same results, the journal editor might say, yeah, we know that guy published the paper 2 years ago. What's new, And if you don't get the same results, the editor and the reviewers might say, well, maybe it was you. Maybe you didn't follow the same study and the same procedures. Maybe there is something that you did differently. Then you got different results. And so it's your problem again. So it's a dilemma in doing replication research. So pre-registration will probably help alleviate some of these problems.
Yeah, and you're kind of spearheading this. I don't really hear a lot of other people talking about it. Seems like you were kind of out ahead of it. When you started, getting together with Phil and thinking about doing these types of things, were you worried that these papers weren't going to be published, or did you have confidence that they would?
The strategy that we follow is that we don't do research piecemeal, as it were. Mm-hmm. We design a bunch of studies at once, and I take the lead in, say, 2 or 3 papers, and he takes the lead in 2 or 3 papers. Another member takes the lead of 2 or 3 papers. So we are not in a way putting all our eggs in one basket. We don't have just one egg in that basket, and if that paper doesn't take off, we spent years and nothing. Right. We have a bunch of papers, then we have a good likelihood that something at least will get published.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, let's finish off the paper. I know you're a busy man, so we're coming up on an hour here. What were your findings or your conclusions?
Yeah. So we collected data. We tested the L2 motivational self-system on English as a second language in Korea, Chinese as a third language, and mathematics as a non-language subject. So English is a global language, Chinese is a non-global language, let's say. Mm-hmm. So there have been some arguments that English is also different from other languages because it is a global language.
I like that part of the paper, by the way. I did like that argument that you made. People should read that part of the paper for sure.
And mathematics. And we did the analyses, and we tried to imagine we did 3 separate analyses. So we analyzed the English data using the L2 motivational self-system, and we imagined ourselves as researchers of English, and the results were okay. They would support the model. Mm-hmm. And then we did the same analysis on Chinese data, and we imagined ourselves that we are Chinese language researchers, and the model was okay. Results are fine. Then we did the analysis on mathematics. Also, the results are pretty much the same. So there was some minor differences here and there, but wasn't like a qualitatively different result in favor of English and perhaps Chinese over mathematics, the non-language subject. It wasn't like that. So our results did not support the idea that there is a fundamental difference between language learning and learning mathematics at the motivational level.
I wonder how it would work if you expanded this project to, study abroad programs. So learners studying abroad and the different subjects that they're studying, like, the study in their major, the language that they're studying of the native language or other things. I wonder if the model would still work for that as well. Because these are required subjects in a high school, right?
Yes. So the idea is that, do we need a different theory to explain language learning motivation than a theory that explains another school subject? Mm-hmm. Or can we go back to, say, Chomsky's metaphor, principles and parameters? So Chomsky had this idea that the different languages follow one set of principles that apply to all languages in the world, and the differences are related to the parameters of these principles. So it's not a fundamental difference between languages. You may have the subject here and the subject there. You may have preposition before the word. In Japanese, maybe you have it afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have these differences, but it follows the same principles. Also, is there evidence that the motivation to learn a language cannot be explained by the motivation to learn mathematics? And that's an empirical question. And there isn't really much to support the idea that we need a separate theory for language learning and a separate theory to learn mathematics and a separate theory to learn history. And so it's just the motivation to learn.
The only thing I disagree with my arguments coming from your paper is the idea about, learning a second language. There's this idea of maybe subtraction as an adult, or look at it a different way, assimilation. So for me, and it might be different depending on which culture, right? If I go and live in England, or if I go and live in South Africa, or even Germany, it's a little bit closer than Japan, right? So I have less motivation to study Japanese because I don't want to become Japanese. And it's hard to separate the language from the culture. How you behave, how you speak, how you address people older than you, how do you use respectful words, like how you become overly polite, how you become indirect. It's against my personality. On the other hand, I'm actually motivated to study karate, like a martial arts in Japan, for some of the same reasons that you talk about in this paper. Being around these people that are great at karate, like I want to be around them. Like it's motivating. It's cool to be around them. And I like learning Japanese through karate, but I have less of a motivation to assimilate or subtract from my identity. So there's got to be a difference. I mean, if we're talking about, curriculum in a high school, I think it's a different test than someone living abroad, don't you think?
So, that's a possibility. And we actually tested this in our paper. And we thought that maybe it's not the identity, maybe the identity subtraction, not the identity addition, that you add another component to your identity subtraction. But our empirical results, unfortunately, did not support this idea.
Wow.
It's an empirical question. If you have to go and test it empirically. And also remember that, is it something intrinsic to the language, or is it how you view it? So somebody else might view mathematics or statistics or another subject in the same way. So this thing will apply to them also. If this happens, then can we not have one, let's say, integrative theory or universal theory that can explain these different phenomena rather than separate mini theories, each one explaining a different thing? You can have many theories, but in the end, you will have an umbrella theory that explains these things.
Yeah, but do you really have to assimilate to acquire the skill of statistics?
Do you need to assimilate to learn a language?
Yeah.
Gardner himself.
No, assimilate to learn statistics or to learn mathematics. Do you have to subtract your identity or subtract something from your personality to gain a skill?
Exactly. That was our hypothesis. We thought that the most reasonable hypothesis is that there is no subtraction if you learn mathematics, right?
Right.
That was our hypothesis, but it wasn't borne out empirically. We were surprised, there's nothing. Maybe there is something if you look harder, but we couldn't find anything. So, going back, Gardner himself said in one of his papers, integrating into another culture never meant that, in a literal sense, you want to be part of these people. It's just, a positive affection toward speakers of the language, basically. And not any real integration with them in the sense that you lose your first identity.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have to, I mean, that's where it goes. You know, you have these ideas and you're challenging them. I think it's also going to, you know, spur on some other research projects as well. I could think of some other research projects that could come on the back of this. And I don't know if you guys already have some in the works, but it's exciting to read about, and also just challenging preconceived notions and ideas that, you know, people just kind of take for granted. Like you said, I mean, I kind of took it for granted that motivations would be different to learn a language, especially studying abroad, than something else.
Now the problem, you know, somebody might ask, so what's the importance of answering this question? The answer is, once you believe that language learning motivation is different from, say, mathematics learning motivation, then you will not feel the need to read that literature, right?
Why?
Because you think it's different, and you will not feel the need to go publish with them and tell them about your results, because you will say, oh, it's different. And that's actually what's happening here. We don't actually cite, if you go and read motivation literature, we don't actually go and cite the latest findings in educational psychology, for example. It's completely irrelevant to us, in a sense. It's non-existent. And they don't come and read and cite it's only occasionally. It's not like, you know, we are in conversation with them. And this is the problem because of this mindset.
All right. So in some ways, I mean, this can make it a lot easier for people. One less variable to worry about.
Yeah.
And then your goal of interdisciplinary research, you know, people coming together, you know, reaching out across fields. And I mean, talk about it in the paper, you know, less.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, this will set up bridges between different disciplines so that people can sit with each other and talk and exchange ideas, which can be productive.
Okay. Wow. A lot to unpack in this conversation. Again, every time I have you on, I feel like I just keep talking to you for like 3 hours. The name of the paper is The Fundamental Difference Hypothesis, Expanding the Conversation in Language Learning Motivation. Anything else to add for today's conversation?
It was fun speaking to you, and I hope that anybody who reads that paper will enjoy it.
And I'll put some links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Ali Al-Hoorie, for coming on Lost in Citations.
Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to contact the show, the best place to find out about us is our website, lostincitations.com. Here you can learn more about the background to this project and how you can get involved. Our hope is to help academics, educators, and online content producers get in contact with each other. Our email address is lostincitations@gmail.com. We also have Facebook and LinkedIn pages. Please rate and comment on the sites you use to download your podcasts. It helps us reach more potential listeners. But probably the most helpful thing you can do is, if you like our content, recommend it to a friend and let them know what we're trying to do. Thank you very much.